in the profession. It gave young people the opportunity, not so much to shop around, but to kind of see how different offices work, how they're structured, and to meet people, both meet contemporaries of themselves, and then also meet older people who were hosting and giving talks. And originally they were talks just about practice. So, and then really they could cover anything about practice. So it could be your personal journey, how you say found yourself into your job, or how you grew your business. Oftentimes they were about a particular skill set or a specific project. But they were always, the nice thing about having them online is that as I see the attendee number click up, you know, we're at 37 now and people are still coming in. You know, a lot of offices, especially offices of our size, you know, we have, 10 employees, typically. We couldn't fit 40 more people in our office to give a talk and have it manageable in any way. So one benefit of having these talks online is that essentially whoever wants to attend can attend, and it gives you a taste of the work that an office is doing, their dynamic, especially in a group like this where we have multiple people talking. It allows to hear kind of how conversations are structured in the office and the different voices. In person, it's often a kind of an office tour and a much smaller group, but it works nicely both ways. Maybe I can ask if any of our speakers who are all on right now had attended any of the in-person Beat Talks, back when we were able to do things in person in a reasonable way. Had any of you been to one in your early careers?
Yeah, I've been to a couple, and it was always nice to see, familiar faces, but also just new connections. And when we could do it with a glass of wine in our hands, like that was
That's
excellent.
right. Wine, pizza, cookies, we have it all. That's good. We're up at 51, so and steady. So I'm just going to chat a little bit more. It's exciting. We just I've been recently meeting with the executive group, who you're going to hear from really shortly, about scheduling talks throughout this entire year. And right before we started this talk, we were speaking about potentially to circle back to any of the ones we had the in-person talks we had planned for 2020 and 2021 that had to be canceled, trying to figure out how to get some of them outside at least, so we could match people's comfort levels and try to slowly work our way back to in-person events. And I think we'll give it maybe 6:04. We'll at 6:05, Fotini. Why don't you unmute, and then I'll know to, I'll mute myself at that point, and we can start tonight's presentation, because numbers are still going up steadily. So we want to wait just one more minute for people to join the conversation tonight. And if anyone's having trouble logging in, some of our executive group will help with tech, and then we'll be good to go.
I think we can start. So, hi everyone. Welcome to another virtual Beat Talk event. My name is Fotini Pitoglu and I'm an executive member of Beat. Today with me are Sharon Philip and Ramona Atlaka, executive members of Beat, along with Betsy Williamson, who is an advisory member. I would like to begin by taking a moment to acknowledge that the land we are based on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit.
Thank you to everyone for joining us this evening. We are honored to have SvN host tonight's Beat Talk. Beat is continuing to work in collaboration with local architects to provide a platform for promoting equity within the profession through networking and leadership opportunities. Beat Talks are a series of discussions held at the offices of architects across the city where hosts will share their learned experience. You may sign up for our mailing list on the Beat website to receive notifications for more details on upcoming events.
This talk is being recorded and will be posted to the Beat social media for those who could not attend. All of the participants' microphones were muted upon entry, but you will be able to submit questions at any point during the presentation in the Q&A section at the bottom center of your screen. We will read your questions after SvN's presentation. The chat box can be used for any immediate troubleshooting assistance.
This webinar qualifies for one OAA structured learning hour, so please stay till the end of the talk to receive your certificate. The Con Ed certificates will be emailed to the participants by the end of April.
Few words about SvN, which is one of the only integrated design firms with urban designers, planners, architects, and landscape architects under one roof. Over the past 40 years, SvN has shaped the built environment in regions, cities, and towns worldwide. They have revitalized industrial waterfronts, developed new forms of affordable housing, designed resilient neighborhoods, stimulated improvements to the quality of the public realm, and promoted the economic development of both rural and urban regions. And I would like to pass it on to Betsy and Sharon to introduce this evening's hosts.
Thank you, Fotini. There's a group of speakers tonight, so we'll give you a general introduction and they're going to take over and do the whole presentation. So Liana Bresler is a principal at SvN with over 15 years of experience designing housing, libraries, and institutional buildings. Liana is currently co-leading the integrated transit-oriented development team on the Ontario line as a technical advisor to Metrolinx and Infrastructure Ontario, and is the principal in charge for the Bob Rumball Center Group Home for Deaf Youth. Now, saying that you're doing the Ontario line is interesting. So if I have any questions ever, now I know who to reach out to because it's kind of going through my neighborhood. Next, Shonda Wang. So Shonda is also a principal at SvN with nearly 2 decades of experience in large-scale urban regeneration projects concentrated on mobility, planning, and design. She has led numerous award-winning mobility-related projects linking the public realm, built form, and transportation infrastructure. Lina Al-Dajani is a senior associate at SvN, a licensed landscape architect and registered urban planner. Her areas of expertise include master planning, community engagement, urban design guidelines, policy review, and large-scale infill developments. Lina is currently the chair of the Canadian Society of Landscape Architects Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, which is JEDI Task Force, and she also leads the SvN JEDI Research Group. Thank you so much, and on to Sharon for the rest of the introductions.
Thank you, Betsy. We also are joined by Danielle Whitley, who is another Senior Associate at SvN. She is a licensed architect who works on project types ranging from single-family residential to complex, large-scale institutional and commercial projects. She is also actively involved in the academic community and is currently a sessional lecturer at the University of Toronto. And last but not least, we have Andrea Gaus, who's also a Senior Associate, and she specializes in the planning, design, and construction of institutional, residential, and commercial projects across Ontario. We are so excited to listen to SvN's presentation today, and I will hand it over to you, Shonda.
Thanks, Sharon. Thanks, Betsy, for the intro. And hello, everyone. It's great to be with you all tonight and for us to all kind of take a break from our day-to-day and just have a session to have a good conversation here. maybe what I'll do is I'll actually just start by introducing SvN and speaking a little bit more about us, just to add on to the intro there. If we could go to the next slide, Danielle, that would be awesome. And as you heard in the intro, we're a firm that has decades of history, really starting with our founding partner, John Van Nostrand, in the former iterations and brands of our firm. Some of you may know that prior to 2015, we had multi-brands, Planning Alliance, Regional Architects, and Replan. And there was a point in time in 2015 where at that juncture in time, we decided to rebrand as SvN and just essentially simplify things for everybody with the one name, SvN. But it was a really important time for us because we were able to then think about, well, what have we been doing over the past number of decades? And what do we want to be doing as we move forward? What do we do well and what do we want to keep doing? And we had a number of different conversations amongst the leadership team, but also with several sessions that we facilitated with our broader studio to talk about these very questions. And through that, we understood that we really wanted to be tackling what we refer to as the critical urban issues of our time. For us, like you can see here on the screen, in the context of one of the fastest growing regions in North America, housing is definitely a critical issue, certainly in the GTA and all over the world, but access to great housing and the supportive communities that underpin the housing. Having choice and access about how we're going to move around our cities and doing that in a really sustainable way. And those are two amongst some of the critical urban issues. We tackle a number of others, including just the big concept of sustainability and how we can build better. If we go to the next slide, Betsy and Sharon gave us a good intro, so maybe we'll move to the next one. Backing the several of us that are here with you tonight, we are backed by a very talented, very diverse team of architects, landscape architects, urban designers, and planners. We are super stoked to kind of work together as an integrated team. Some of you may not know that we are in fact a studio of almost 130 people now. We've grown really exponentially over the last couple of years in particular. So one, we're very thankful to have grown to that scale through the pandemic. But I think it's really a reflection of how we work as an integrated design team, and you'll hear more about that tonight. Next slide, Danielle. And so you can see here, we have all of these different areas of practice. We really enjoy, like I said, working together in a really collective way. And it's not uncommon for us to ensure that we have really mixed design teams for every single one of our projects, irrespective of what scale of the project we're at, whether it's an early conceptual design phase or even a policy document that we're producing, like a secondary plan, all the way through our built projects. We ensure that our teams always have a mix of all of these disciplines so we can tackle the work together.
And we wanted to start by sharing our core values, the principles that we kind of define and arrive at are really that drive our work every day. Think critical that you can see in the bottom right is really the why we do what we do. We think that we have to think critically to address these urban issues that Shonda mentioned, and to think critically for us is really also to know what to ask the right question, and to ask ourselves what are we really trying to solve here in each and every project. So listen first. If we can go to the next slide, is really a key principle for us. And we wanted to spend a bit of time at the front of the presentation here to kind of talk through how it manifests in our work, both with our clients and in how we work with our teams internally. So we'll start by just briefly presenting 3 recent projects. Shonda mentioned the integrated practice. We want to kind of demonstrate through a few different scales what we really mean by integration, and talk about the importance of regeneration. And by regeneration, we mean both from an environmental perspective and social, and we'll expand a bit on that later. And each of these projects here are at a different scale, but we think kind of operate in some ways similarly. So on the small end of things, we have Lawrence Thornton. That's a childcare addition we completed in 2020 in Toronto Community Housing in Scarborough. Next, we'll talk about Trent Lands, which Lina will present. That is a large master planning project we did for Trent University. It began as a master planning kind of campus plan, but really became a very intensive stakeholder engagement. And Lina will speak about that. And then somewhere in the middle in terms of scale is Mimico, which Shonda will present, where really SvN brought together unanticipated stakeholders to form this development, and which is one of the first transit-oriented development in our region, and was really a catalyst for the program that the provincial government is now running for the transit-oriented development across our region. So we'll talk through these briefly and then have a bit of a panel discussion here, and then open to questions from everyone, from all of you. And starting with Lawrence Thornton, if I can say a few words about that. So we began that project back in 2016, where SvN and ERA were selected by the local community here to look holistically at the whole area. There's a tower and a few kind of low rises that surround it. And the goal was to look at a comprehensive retrofit. The Reset project was looking at the TCH properties that were really not deemed suitable for redevelopment or intensification, but they needed that deep retrofit. And the childcare that was finished a couple of years ago is one of the outcomes of this process. We've done other work on the site, and we are in fact still working on it on future phases. So we began the work, if you go to the next slide, with the community engagement. We spent almost a year working with the communities, with members that kind of volunteer to work with us in a fairly intensive way, and trying to understand the issues here, and also the opportunities that they presented. And we worked to arrive at design principles and some kind of overall concepts presented in the plan here on the right. And at this point, the childcare was not really in the picture. It's really when the Reset funding kind of fell through that TCH went and tried to find other funding opportunities to advance the vision of the master plan in other ways, and introduce this important amenity to the community. Next slide, please. This is what the site looked like before the addition. Probably a familiar site to many of you, very kind of common in our region. Really the legacy of these type of tower developments from the 60s and 70s was enshrined also in the zoning that didn't permit any non-residential uses. So part of our work, which is I think back to 2015 or so, that we did with the Center for Urban Growth and Renewal, we kind of identify the planning barriers for the growth and the prosperity of these tower communities. And one of the issues was really trying to introduce this small scale, whether it's commercial institutional uses at grade, both to animate the spaces, but also, you know, an important thing to introduce in areas where residents don't have these type of amenities within walking distances. And we use the addition to address beyond just the program of the childcare, this fairly kind of harsh condition at grade, and create a new face and a frontage for the community. So if we look at it from a site plan on the next slide, you can see Lawrence Avenue on the north, the addition located on the north end of the tower. That's the kind of green roof that you see there. And it's located entirely above the parking garage. Thanks, Danielle. That's great. You know, the location there, yes, it creates a frontage on Lawrence, but on the south side, it actually encloses and shelters the courtyard that was existing, but will be enhanced in future phases and blocks the prevailing winds. It enhances one of the important pedestrian paths through the site, which is going from the bus stop kind of on Lawrence on the upper left side of the image and traversing across and then down to enter the tower from actually the surface parking on the right side, the east side of the tower, and also frames a new very important connection that we're creating into the tower from the courtyard to kind of enliven the courtyard and reestablish it as a central kind of prominent space in the community. So the daycare does a lot of kind of double duty in terms of its siting in the plan that way. If we zoom into the plans next to look at how it's laid out, so you can see in blue the administrative and support spaces tucked under the ground floor of the tower, and surrounding them, the classrooms are arranged in yellow in this kind of street and kind of court arrangement with this large interior space for the kids to play in. On the upper right in the section, you can kind of see the green roof above the addition. This was really important for us with you know, the daycare being added to this existing tower. We wanted to make sure the view down and out of these windows was actually like enhanced and with this addition. So we found other space for all the mechanical equipment and kept the roof clear and just covered in planting. I think we have a couple of views next of the exterior. So this is the approach from the west. So, you know, what was previously a pretty kind of dark and uneventful walk from the bus to the entrance now has been enhanced. There's lighting. It's framed by this outdoor play area. And we also created this new access and entrance into the courtyard. And the canopy that you see here does kind of triple duty. It provides shade, of course. It illuminates this access, and it also is a structural transfer that takes the load from the roof of the daycare down to the parking garage through these columns that you see in the image here. And then finally, a couple of shots from the interior in the end. We were pretty budget conscious in this project, so we use simple strategies like, you know, increasing the ceiling heights to the extent we could and just providing generous windows to keep it kind of light and airy inside. And very happy to finally this year have 54 kids making a mess of the space and enlivening it. And we're still working on it. We are working with the area on the courtyard and working on the community spaces within the tower this year.
I think we can go to the next slide. Thanks, Liana. I'm happy to be here to speak to everybody. So this is an image here of Trent University's Simons campus. It's a really beautiful 1,400-acre campus that straddles the Otonabee River in the middle, and it's located in Peterborough. And after pursuing a number of development opportunities, the university faced some opposition, primarily related to environmental concern. And in one case that actually canceled one of their projects. So it became clear to them that they needed to do a review and grounding process of their land use planning initiatives, and they needed to reach out to the public to realize their own aspirations. And so we began working with the university in 2017. So on the next slide, you'll see an image that shows the outcome of the Trent Lands Plan, which was a high-level framework, and it articulated a vision for growth. And that vision was really rooted in that community engagement and a deep understanding of the land. The plan integrates Western science with Indigenous worldviews, and it redefines the development process through that kind of exploration activity.
and it prioritizes nature inclusive design in a way that other campus plans typically don't. So on the next slide, we're just showing some high level numbers, but the project was really extensive in its community engagement process. There were 108 community meetings, of which 42 were with faculty, staff, and students. 26 were with Michisagi, consultation liaisons, and elders and traditional knowledge keepers. And there were hundreds who attended 7 in-person and Zoom meetings. And we also had over 500 newsletter subscribers. And really the key messages that we heard from the public really emphasized this notion of resilience and having a regenerative future and leadership through trans activities in not only resilience from an environmental standpoint, but also integrating indigenous worldviews and visibility and working towards reconciliation. And so this notion was integrated across all aspects of the plan. The plan really recognizes that sustaining the status quo is not enough. And so we were, through a lot of back and forth, we were encouraged to move away from the term sustainability and really focus on regeneration and resilience, because the goal for the plan was to have as many positive impacts as possible. So on the next slide, it's a text-heavy slide, and I apologize. But we're showing 4 guiding principles that we developed and that were validated through the various engagement activities. And on the right-hand side, you'll see a set of Anishinaabe Nibwakoin, or wisdom guiding principles. And those were developed in collaboration with the Michisagi and the Indigenous peoples through the leadership of Bob Goulet, who was our Indigenous engagement consultant. And so on the next slide, you'll see some examples. Sorry for the quality. I think maybe it's my screen, but an example of a tangible project for the university that might include opportunities for Indigenous placemaking on campus, finding an appropriate space in collaboration with the First Nations for an Indigenous roundhouse or contemporary house, places for ceremony and gathering, definitely access to nature and the water, and Indigenous medicine and food gardens as just examples of how this might manifest physically on space in campus. On the next slide, you see an example of some of the guidance that we were providing for nature inclusive design. Again, this notion of integrating landscape building and all aspects of land use planning really was driven by the engagement process, especially with the First Nations, but also with some environmental activists. And a lot of these concepts were actually developed very much in collaboration and partnership, I would say, with North-South Environmental. So we had an ecologist really plugged into the planning process. And a primary goal of the plan is to protect and enhance and restore trans woodlands and wetlands, and really to foster biodiversity and sustain ecosystem functions. And it was really important that Trent committed to maintaining at least 60% of their campus lands as nature areas and green space, and to be an active caretaker for this ecosystem. So the plan did include 3 priorities for nature area stewardship, including supporting species at risk, species of conservation concern, and enhancing existing and restoring former features and habitats, and finally promoting positive experiences with and opportunities to learn from the natural environment. So striking a balance between when people are engaging with the natural environment and when it needed to be protected and preserved. On the next slide is another example of how we might infuse nature. So wildlife corridors, ecological buffers, and mitigation techniques for reducing disturbances are all examples of measures that could be taken to enhance biodiversity on campus. In this example, an enhanced buffer provides protection for the natural feature, but it also includes opportunities to create habitat for birds and other fauna. And the naturalized development edge reimagines the back of house as a place where people connect with nature, either through trails that could be integrated in that landscaping space, or from the interior of buildings by maximizing views to the natural area and therefore increasing that kind of visibility and appreciation for nature. And there's just one more slide, I believe. I just wanted to highlight some of the exciting achievements that we've accomplished in just 1 year. The plan was approved and adopted by the Board of Governors in February of last year. And so far, it's been continuing a legacy of engagement with First Nations. The Trent University has gone ahead and done some key strategic hiring. They've secured over $350,000 in grants of funding to be able to move forward with some of these projects. They won a provincial award for a new long-term care home that they're planning on integrating on campus, which will also include culturally sensitive and appropriate spaces for elders and First Nations. And they're initiating student research projects to support this vision for a regenerative Trent farm. The university has also embarked on a new site planning process with local agencies, which starts with a natural heritage brief. And it was developed in collaboration with First Nations. And this natural heritage brief would define the development limits based on an understanding of existing conditions before you start your site design. So it slightly changes the process and therefore the approvals that are needed to take to the next step. And with that, I'll pass it on to Shonda to speak to Mimico.
Thanks, Lina. It's kind of amazing. You can summarize in like 5 minutes that mammoth of a project. Great job. So finally, third kind of case study that we'll feature tonight, and then we'll open it up to some discussion here, is Mimico. And one of our favorite projects in the office. In this case here, you can see where the Mimico lands are relative to central Toronto. You can see obviously the lake over there, Lakeshore Boulevard, and just kind of tucked against the buildings that you see highlighted here is the Lakeshore West Go corridor, which means that the Mimico station, which is central to the Mimico master planned lands, is only 2 stops away from Union Station. So very close to the central core and only 1 stop away from the Ontario line, which opens up this area to the whole region. If we move to the next slide, Danielle. We started working on behalf of Van Dyke Properties several years ago, and I'm going to highlight a couple of the sites that they have. They have 3 sites in total within the Mimico Triangle area that you see highlighted in yellow. And the 2 that I'm going to talk about are highlighted in blue. The one just off of Royal York Road, that triangular piece of land is referred to as 327 Royal York. And the one just east of it, east of Windsor Street, that north-south street there in the view, is 39 Newcastle. So those 2 sites in blue are Van Dyke lands. The lands to the south in green are owned by Metrolinx, where there is that existing Mimico GO station I mentioned in the form of a beautiful pop-up of a pavilion in the middle of a very extensive surface parking lot that serves the commuters accessing that transit station. If we go to the next page, and I'll focus in on the couple of images on the top there. I know they're a bit teeny tiny, but just to give you a bit of context that when Van Dyke came to purchase these 2 sites, there were actually existing entitlements for the lands. For 327 Royal York, you can see a plan view of what was proposed there on the left. Essentially, it was 1 tower on a podium, really oriented to Royal York Road on the west. And the balance of that triangular site that you see there was for surface parking. It was also for functional needs like access and servicing of that building, but really just kind of sat adjacent to and kind of turned its back on the GO station that was located right there in the Metrolinx lands. And then in a similar way, while it was under a different ownership there at 39 Newcastle, the previous owner had secured permissions for a 3-tower scheme. You can see the 3 towers there sitting on top of a 4-story, pretty mega podium. Again, in this case, now oriented to the north to Newcastle and really turning its back on the rest of the sides to the Metrolinx lands. In fact, there was a crash wall, pretty extensive crash wall that really wrapped along the southern and eastern edge of that building. And so to make a very long story short, when we started working on Mimico together with other design team members, technical team members, and really in very close collaboration with Metrolinx and with the city, we spent quite a bit of time thinking about how we could totally reconceive the way that these buildings would respond to its local environment, including the rail corridor. How in fact, instead of treating the rail corridor as a back, we could actively front it. And that really made just like a whole world of difference in how we started to look at this site. You can kind of see in the kind of cartoon diagram there that by addressing the rail corridor and structurally integrating with new transit facilities, we could in fact free up the ground plane, over 50% of that being for public realm. Next slide. So this is a zoom in of the one property on the west side, 327 Royal York. And we like this plan because it just gives a highlight of how through conversations with Metrolinx and the city, we were able to think about blurring the lines between the two sites. So you can see that red dashed line that denotes the existing or former existing Metrolinx and Van Dyke property lines. And then how in those the colored blobs there, you can see the program that's associated with the new Mimico GO station that was to be built, essentially pushed into the Van Dyke lands, which allowed us to then integrate what the city wanted to incorporate into this area, which was a multi-use path that they coined the Greenway, a 4-meter wide multi-use path that really travels across the Mimico neighborhood, and then integrate a really extensive transit plaza and create direct accessible connections to the transit facilities and to the development. Next slide. Shows another view here. This is the view of the east development at 39 Newcastle in a similar way, integrating. You can see the kind of canopy that juts out there that provides that weather protection to a new integrated station with the mixed use development and the rest of the transit plaza there, and a new park and series of new public parks that would be introduced in the area. I think the next few slides are just a few renderings here. Why don't we flash through those quickly? There's a view of one of the Mimico entrances and a view from Newcastle Street. You can see what it looks like today, these super underutilized parts of our city. And it's pretty incredible to think what can be possible when we start looking at our lands in an integrated way. So with that, I would love to open this conversation up to our panelists. I'm going to play the role of moderator here. And maybe I'll just open it up with a few questions that we'll kind of cover over the next 10, 15 minutes before I open it up to the group. I'm going to go back actually to something that Liana spoke about when she was talking about SvN's core values, and listen first being one of our most important ones. And I'd like to ask this group how listen first is reflected in each of your projects and your processes, and how it's even maybe enabled you to find your own voice within the studio and the firm. I'll start with you, Lina. You joined SvN 3 years ago. You've demonstrated that you're a natural leader through that. I'd love to hear more about your transition to SvN and tell us about your practice and how you cultivate a listen first approach.
Sure, I'd love to respond to that. So really, I try to view my role as more of a facilitator role where I'm gathering information from others, from people who really know the space as well. They've used it. They have that intimate knowledge with the space. And so we take that feedback, and then it's a matter of interpreting it and translating it into a design language and applying it from a planning perspective. But the reality is that any user of a space would have more knowledge of its nuances, its physical and social attributes, which we really can't capture from just a site visit or a desktop exercise. And so it's invaluable to me to seek meaningful engagement with local champions, First Nations, and any way that could push our project in ways that our insight alone couldn't. And Trent is a really perfect example for that.
Yeah. Great. Danielle, next question for you. You work as a senior leader in our team. You're an architect. Tell us what this means as you're leading our complex, large-scale architectural projects.
Sure, yeah. So, I mean, listen first for me is really kind of embedded in the way that we work and in our design process. So it means that we kind of leave any egos in check at the door and really set the tone for a collaborative work environment where we value what everyone is bringing to the table, whether or not it's kind of a student that's joining our team or 1 year of experience or 20. We try to focus on more of a collective problem solving and recognizing that everyone's bringing something different to the table. In other words, it's really not a hierarchical approach where you have a sketch that's coming down from high, but much the opposite, actually. I find that this process has allowed me to cultivate my role. You know, if Lina thinks she's a facilitator, I see myself a bit as a design curator of sorts. So it's as much about leading kind of the day-to-day management of the team, but also just kind of encouraging the team to do their best work.
Andrea, you're a senior architect in our studio, and I know that you come with a breadth of experience on the institutional side, especially. And in the last number of years, in fact, you've been helping to grow our mobility practice. You're a PM on a number of our projects, including Ontario Line today. So what does the Listen First value mean to you as you're working with multi-stakeholder teams?
Yeah, so I think the scale of projects is actually a really kind of interesting way to kind of apply the listen first principle. So in the example of Mimico, where we're really working with a client and really kind of trying to kind of bring this idea of this kind of multi-use path that was a requirement of the secondary plan put forth by the city. It was really just kind of understanding a challenging site and kind of treating the sites as puzzle pieces that would be instrumental to kind of stitching this multi-use path together and just kind of understanding, you know, the developer's role in really kind of wanting that to be a marquee project and responding and kind of understanding that they were really kind of key to realizing this vision for the city. So that was pretty interesting. You know, in contrast, the work that I'm doing on the Ontario line, and I think kind of pointing out the scale of the work and the scale of the project is actually really interesting. So from a traditional architectural delivery standpoint, we're very used to working on a single building with a team of consultants and of course stakeholders, whereas on the Ontario line, we are one team, part of, you know, one of many teams that all kind of need to work together. We're working on short-term timelines, long-term timelines, and just kind of understanding that, you know, we're not necessarily, there's the client and there are multiple stakeholders who are driving the process, and we're really trying to come up with solutions that really kind of have to navigate these kind of short and long-term drivers in a very kind of sophisticated and thoughtful way. So that kind of positioning and the listen first principle are really key and really just kind of unlocks the way forward.
Yeah, it's not just at the beginning of a project, is it? It's all the way through. It's every day applying that approach.
And it's process as well, right? So not only is it the design approach, but it's also kind of identifying the process and how things are being done, and you know, whether there's a way to kind of make that process smoother, especially when there are a ton of stakeholders involved.
Yeah. I wondered if we could kind of now turn it into how we apply it to our projects. We've talked a little bit about that more from a process point of view. Liana, can you speak about how this value found its way into the Lawrence Orton project?
Yeah, so I spoke a little bit about the kind of long engagement that led up and preceded actually the childcare design. So through that, we arrived at these set of design principles with the community. And even though we were just implementing a small part, that was very much a driver and always in the background in our discussion. And we've continued to engage the community through the design of the childcare. It was important. It's not necessarily something that was kind of directly, maybe directly a need of the community, but it was more of a tool for us to invest there and achieve some other objectives. So it was important to just, you know, keep checking with the community and see how we're doing and trying to, you know, balance those different objectives. And it became even more complex when the childcare, we brought in the City of Toronto as a client. So now there's the objective of Toronto Community Housing, there's the objectives of the childcare that's very concerned with the program, and then there's the, the community that has a whole set of other issues. So actually continuing the conversation was key, and having to report back and actually stand in front of people was very important to the process all the way to the construction, and we're still doing that.
Mm-hmm. Danielle, I was just talking in the intro there in that bit of a intro deck about how in 2015 and in the time following, we spent a lot of time thinking about the type of projects we wanted to do. We also did a lot of introspection about, well, who are the clients that we really love working with? Who's a good fit for us and who fits with our values? I wondered if you could speak about what Listen First looks like when you work with our clients and apply that day to day.
Yeah, definitely. I think that that's key and something to bring up. It's the importance of establishing a rapport with our clients, creating that open line of dialogue and communication so that we can really actively problem solve together. So it's been really important for us to have supportive clients and consultants, not only that can share the values of our firm, but ultimately the vision for the project itself. We often hold kind of design charrettes with our client teams to generate ideas and to kind of strategize how to approach some of the tricky situations. One of the projects that we didn't show today, but that I've been working on in Mississauga, we've been working really closely with our client team and with our community engagement consultants to create a compelling narrative and strategy on how to approach the city with the project. So instead of just kind of the standard deliverables of the project stats and the drawings, but really how we can present the problems to the city and our solutions, so they see how it's a real kind of enhancement to the public realm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm finding that in projects that we've been involved in, the more that you can be really transparent with as many stakeholders as possible about the constraints, it's so much easier to bring people on side when you're actually trying to problem solve a design solution to that. Let's move to this next question here. I'm wondering with this group, how does your project work integrate and respond to the diverse voices that we often have in our projects? Clients, community members, design team members, etc. Lina, could you tell us about a little bit more about the voices within the Trentlands project and how you were able to actually integrate and respond to their needs and requirements effectively?
Absolutely, yeah. So there was a really big range of interest in the Trentlands plan, from university administrators to students and faculty who had different interests, a wider community that included the First Nations rights holders, approvals agencies, potential partners and funders. It was really quite a long list of people who wanted to be plugged into the plan and wanted to be heard. And so there was a really particular focus and almost a consistent thread across all of these engagements on environmental stewardship and that desire for Trent to be a leader that I mentioned earlier. So what we were able to do is through that established a shared vocabulary, those key guiding principles that everybody agreed to, they were not contested. And because of that, we had a performance-based process where we could then create a plan that had to satisfy these 4 guiding principles. And it became a matter of fact, right? If everybody wanted to enhance biodiversity, then a certain number of interventions were necessary to achieve that goal on the campus. And so that was the process that we kind of took to try to understand who all the different voices are, what are the common threads between them, the key messages that we can create that performance-based set of criteria that then can form the basis of our plan.
Mm-hmm. For this group, I'm looking at the time and I want to make sure that we have enough time to get to questions. So I'm just going to get to one final question, and then we'll keep up the conversation here as people ask us questions. Liana, maybe final question for you. I just wonder if you could speak about what makes an integrated project successful from your perspective. How do you measure success? And maybe if you could speak, I know we spend quite a bit of time, especially recently in our studio, talking about the idea of regeneration as a lens that we use to evaluate our projects. Could you tell us about what that means?
Yeah, I'll try to do this kind of very briefly and tie this up, but yeah, I guess the idea of regeneration really has recently become kind of very central to how we view our projects and their success. And I think Danielle spoke to this a little bit, that we can't be just neutral. We can't just do no harm. The goal of each project is to just to regenerate, to improve upon, and in some ways repair, I think, damage that our professions collectively have done throughout history. So I think in the regeneration concept, we're referring to the kind of donut economics, which many of you probably have heard of, and living within the donut. And we're looking at it, I think, trying at each project to understand what's possible, what are the objective, and in kind of what realm we can operate depending on the opportunity. So maybe in the Lawrence Orton example, there were there were goals that had to do with sustainability or the environment, where it was adaptive reuse. It was, minimizing the need for foundations and reducing the carbon footprint that way. But there were also social objectives of working with the community. And so it was really measuring the project on all those fronts and trying to balance out those things that are sometimes in conflict, actually.
Mm. We have, I think I have more questions for you, but I'm feeling like I should open it up and maybe not hog the floor here and the mic. I wondered, Betsy, can I pass the mic back to you?
Yes, and Shonda, I think you have a job waiting for you at BEAT moderating sessions, because that was really amazing to hear you kind of tie everything together and bring out some of the main points that you were really trying to get across with some examples. There are some excellent questions in the Q&A right now. I'm just going to grab one that just showed up, like 2 minutes ago, and it states, firstly, as someone that lives in TCH, I really appreciate the work you all have done to revitalize our neighborhoods. I'm curious, how do you balance what the community needs with what the city wants? Understanding that you need to listen to both, but how do you problem solve the demand from both sides, especially with contrasting interests? Does someone have a heavier weight when it comes to opinion? I'd really love to hear maybe an anecdote about this related, Liana might be the best person to answer this question, or there may be some other anecdotes that can come from some of the other projects about something that you heard, maybe you called out of community engagements, something maybe the city didn't even know was needed because you were able to identify missing voices that they were not.
Yeah, I can start. I can say that in the example of Lawrence Orton, the city was very supportive, and the kind of issues we had to resolve were fairly minor. So it was more of a balancing act of budget, and then the objectives that we had originally set out in the master plan, and then the specific budget that was available for a program. So one of our strategies, or maybe the strategy in this case, was really having things do double duty. So with the means we had, kind of trying to tackle all fronts. So even things like the siding of the building that I spoke to, or the canopy, or positioning the play areas in a way that connected to then the larger courtyard. So it is used for the daycare, but then after hours it's open for the community, so it's not this kind of exclusive use. And it was really trying to be I guess like generous in the way we could with what we had, and then this idea of double duty, and also trying to think, I think, long term to make things that are robust and could evolve, because we don't know what the needs would be 10, 15, 20 years from now.
Does anyone else have a similar or a different anecdote about that type of question of when the development side and the city side are maybe not aligning, and maybe you've heard something from the community that comes up? How do you start to create that balance?
I could speak very briefly on some experience that we've had, maybe for myself personally in the past, having worked on Alexander Park, which is another TCHC redevelopment. I think most people are familiar with it. And SvN continues to actually work on one of the buildings that's just off of Dundas Street there. So it's personally really kind of neat to see things come from plan to build. But I will just maybe give a lot of credit to Toronto Community Housing. They've been such an awesome partner with us and client, technically our client, but I really meant partner, because I find that when we're working with them, they together with typically the city project manager that's assigned to the file, I feel like if we work as a core team together, that's where we're gonna make things happen, because TCHC is all about consulting with their community groups, right? They make that the priority, and you can see how it ends up with some really awesome results. I've been in meetings where maybe you're looking for more of a juicy story. I don't know if I have that, but I remember being in a master plan engagement. So we're early conceptual design, early conceptual design. We're talking like streets, blocks, open spaces. And the number of questions we got about, can I fit my queen size mattress through the bedroom door? Or questions about like the scale of the kitchen. Like these are things that people care about the day to day. And so I think we have to remember that it's really important to always think about how things land on the ground, even if we're at early planning stages.
I'm just going to ask one quick follow-up, then I know Ramona is going to jump in with another question. Given, one of the reasons why we do these series is to elevate voices that potentially are missing from the profession, how do you identify when there's voices missing in community engagement? One thing that you hear about a lot when because I sit on some committees that review proposals and review design, you hear a lot about kids and parents and elderly and commuters and working. You never really hear about teens. Like no one's ever advocating for a space for a group of teenagers to go and be super loud because they're loud. It's just what happens. So how do you kind of find and identify kind of voices missing in the situation? Is it and find a way to call that and bring it forward?
We're waiting for anyone to jump in. Okay. I mean, it's interesting when I think about people, the voiceless audience. My mind jumps actually to nature first and foremost, right? It's not up there protesting at the public meeting. It doesn't have that voice, and unless you have other advocates in the engagement process who are really speaking out for it, it's really difficult to be the advocate for it yourself, sometimes depending on the client and what their objectives are. But I think throughout the process, you start hearing some, I think you start with your engagement with the groups that you do know, and you start hearing about who uses the space, and you can think about whether they're being represented through the engagement. I know we've been working on the Shoppers World master plan with Quadrangle and a very talented team that's done a couple of rounds of engagement. And at our first engagement, public engagement session, we looked around and one of the folks at RioCan is from Brampton, and she looked at me and she said, "This doesn't look like Brampton." Right, the demographic that was there was everyone who was really upset that their fabric land might go away, and we didn't have the diversity, and we didn't have the age range. The users of the mall themselves weren't present, and so for our next engagement session, we actually hosted it directly in the mall in one of the storefronts, and we had it during hours when the mall was open, so people could pop in if they didn't know about it, and we increased our notice range for the notices. So it takes a lot of drive, and I'm sure there will always be some gaps here or there. Sometimes it's also difficult to engage people because they don't want to be engaged, right? Especially with those teenagers,
what's in it for me. Another good way to do it is to incentivize it, have some kind of remuneration or provide food. Food is such a big help in engagement activities, right? Have some food and drink and people will show up. So there are ways that you can get creative, but the number one advice is go to people, and it'll be a lot easier to capture their voices.
Thank you so much, Lina.
That was great. Thank you. I actually will grab a question from the chat. Thank you so much, Alina, for posting this. She writes, I really enjoyed your open letter to the City of Toronto. The house is on fire. Could you speak about your research arm within SvN and how you approached putting together your 5 priority areas to address climate change in the urban context? And also, how has it been received? Great question.
Maybe I can speak to that
Volunteer
one.
Danielle.
Sure. So I was involved in the report. Thank you so much for reading it. First of all, that's great. I'm glad that it's making its rounds in the design community as well. It was definitely a labor of love. So we can only speak about so much tonight, but we do have kind of research arms within SvN that focus on different areas. So one is kind of post-carbon. We also have JEDI, social justice, equity, diversity, inclusion. I forget what the acronym is, as well as housing. And it allows us to explore some critical ideas that we can't always, the idea is always to fold it back into our work, but sometimes to expand on what we're looking at in our day-to-day projects. So this was a project that kind of came about, and it really was a collective effort from our planning team, as well as the architects, landscape architects, urban designers in our office. It was all the disciplines that were involved to develop a response to the city's going through an official plan review right now, the municipal comprehensive review, and we felt strongly in our office that it doesn't have a post-carbon lens to it. So we think it's important to embed that in policy moving forward so that we can have a much more kind of resilient and robust official plan. So taking the side of both kind of the architects and designers, urban designers from our office, as well as kind of the planners who can interpret all of that for us and put it into the right language. So it was, probably something that we've been working on for almost a year to put together that report. And so we submitted it just before the holidays, which, we debated the timing quite a bit, but it coincided with one of the city meetings. But it's kind of in the new year that we're trying to reach out to different partners in the design community, as well as at the city, different municipalities as well, just to really get that thinking out there and to kind of collectively join together, I guess, for these efforts. If anybody wants to read the report, it's on our website as well.
Thanks, Danielle. I'll just ask a question from our Q&A here. You spoke about continuing relationships with the clients who shared your values. Was SvN always able to be selective of the projects they worked on and put an emphasis on having shared values, or does this ability, flexibility to be selective come with time? Could you speak to building your firm's set of values or brand over time?
Sure, yeah, I think that's a great question. And I can kind of expand a bit on what I was speaking to. It's really a bit of a chicken and an egg. So when we find the right clients that we work with, that allows us to do the best work. And so when we can do our best work, then we can put that out there, and then other great clients see that as well. So it definitely takes time to develop that client base. But I think when we do, we're most successful when we align our values with those clients, and also with supportive consultant team as well. I think over the time that I've been at SvN, which is the last 3+ years, I've definitely seen kind of that transformation and allowing us to kind of hone in on the types of projects that we want to work on and that we have the most interest in, and we feel that we can make the most impact as well.
I can add, I think, working with a client that's completely kind of opposite to you is just a dead end, but sometimes it's the client in the middle that you can really kind of pull along that would not maybe have considered something, and this kind of like this little bit of increment of improvement, they're not always like as fulfilling of a process, and I don't think it's maybe not our best work, but it's really a way to make impact, I think, where sometimes you can't, despite the like challenges of the process.
I think I can add a little bit to that as well. I mean, I think on the mobility side, and certainly since my involvement on kind of Mimico and the work we've been doing in that realm, and certainly kind of for a lot of kind of developments that are especially located along transit lands, I think our kind of care and attention to like an integrated approach, really kind of combining, architecture, urban design, and landscape, and thinking about that holistically, has really kind of allowed us to get more kind of repeat clients in that realm. So I think there's been a high level of trust, certainly in the mobility realm. So it's been really nice to kind of see that portion of the practice kind of grow and change, especially over the last few years.
I still remember, Andrea, some of our early days sketching together in studio, just amongst the SvN team. And even people that weren't necessarily assigned to the project team were in the room just sketching what could be possible. And it was probably one of the most enjoyable meetings that I remember. That it's super infectious, because then we bring that to the way that we then charrette on with our team members, even when we're trying to engage other people, other stakeholders. So it's got to be fun too, right, for everybody.
Oh, for sure.
A question about doing some of your engagement and collaborations during COVID. Have you been able to continue doing work in person, or has all your engagement moved to the digital world?
All digital all the time. I'd say we've had to pivot. Like I'd love to hear from you guys about how you all do it. It was a bit of a just try it out, experiment, and even where people would ask for like innovative, flashy, new ways to do digital engagement, we found for us sometimes it was just going back to tried and true things, like let's just orient the camera to a big map that we're going to draw on top of, or a drawing. It's pretty just intuitive for us to work that way. So for sure, we're kind of constantly adapting and trying to always kind of do things differently. We just did a whole, actually 2 rounds of engagement for Ontario Line through the early fall and winter. That's online. So if you guys want to check it out, that's also online. But I'd say, Betsy, mostly virtual.
Yeah, for Trent, we actually had to pivot to online and COVID halfway through the project. So that was a really interesting kind of shift and rethinking of our whole engagement strategy. But we had a series of focus groups or tables that we called them, where they were already small groups, and we were meeting with those folks more regularly. And so those were easier to manage as online sessions. And we were worried about how the draft Trent Lands plan would be received without us presenting it in front of an audience, without an ability to really get the pulse of the crowd, the vibe of the room. It was really tricky to kind of shift. But one of the things we decided to do is to create video animations and just videos that allowed us to present it to people, and then they could watch it at their own time. And then a couple of weeks after that, we had a virtual town hall where there was a Q&A and we were able to answer questions. And Trent was really committed to this. So we actually were releasing weekly newsletters that were responding to questions that were coming in live. So they had someone tracking all of the questions related to the plan, and any questions that seemed to be repeat questions that needed clarification. We were creating quick newsletters that provided a response and references in the plan where this was addressed, or a response that this would be addressed in an updated draft or whatever was necessary at that time. So it was a pivot, and I believe they even mailed copies of the plan to certain people who were in remote areas and couldn't have reliable connections. So a lot of investment and effort went into pivoting through COVID, but it's certainly possible. I'd love to use some kind of installation in physical space to, just plug a QR code on some kind of signage and get people to walk through a concept and have them respond on their phones, right? We could think of ways to get creative with it where they're in person, but we're doing it in a safe way.
Thank you, Lina. We actually have another question from an attendee that asks, what strategies do you use to grow as a firm and maintain long-term sustainability, besides, of course, keeping projects coming?
I can start and maybe others want to join, but it's definitely been a challenge in the last couple of years, I think, particularly because it was coupled with COVID and kind of the growth coincided with also moving to work remotely. And we're very much, I don't know if you can tell from the one image we had in the front, but we were very much like a living, working, everyone kind of loud and together, designing and drawing. So, you know, not this, but on the technology side, I think we found ways to, you know, draw together on Miro and tablets, and all of that was maybe easier to overcome. And I think surprised us how easy it was to transition in some ways. It is challenging to design together virtually, but I think the area that we really are, you know, constantly working on is on how we work together, and getting to know people and creating this connection that's hard to maintain and virtually. And it's not just about the work, but it really influences the work so much, when you really know your colleagues and you have a rapport with them. So we've tried anything you can imagine. We have virtual bays to replicate the office. We have, you know, daily check-ins. We have all this like mentorship structures, and we kind of keep evolving and reinventing. But it's, I think it's just one of the challenges in a growing office is like there's a way you do things, and even though it's diverse, there's some kind of unspoken understanding. And as you grow, you want to make sure everyone's kind of joined with you and going in the same direction. So the core values, you know, predate COVID, but they're an important part of it and something we kind of speak about. And there are other elements, but yeah, it's an ongoing kind of effort.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. So Sharon, you're going to start with our wrap up, right?
Yes.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you to all the panelists, and on behalf of BEAT, we would like to thank you for joining us and participating in tonight's event. A special thank you to Shonda, Liana, Lina, Andrea, and Danielle for giving the talk and connecting everybody virtually, and also to Ian for helping us organize the event.
We do have a couple more events coming up soon in February and March. So please sign up for our mailing list to receive notifications. Thank you again, and have a great rest of your evening.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Really appreciate it. Good night.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
My last joke question was going to be, have any of you applied to move to the Mexico office after this storm?
There is currently at least one person in Mexico that I could validate. But we do have, you know, it's nice because we do have a diverse office. People have been able to go home and visit family. So I think we have someone in New Zealand, we've got someone in Colombia, we've got someone in Mexico. I'm losing track of all the places people are. I think someone was in Italy for a while visiting her family.
Yeah, there was Chile.
Good.
There was
Chile, yeah. Yeah, for sure.
We often joke about site visits. We need to go on a site visit to Mexico. Probably check that out.
There's a huge problem. There's a huge problem. We got to go down and check it out.
Yeah. Can certainly use some vitamin D.
That would help.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much for having us.
Night.
Take care.
Thanks.
Bye.